Differentiated instruction enables teachers to meet different student needs while focusing on the same objectives for learning. In every classroom, we have students who already know much of what we are about to teach, as well as students who will struggle greatly to grasp new material. This is true in all classrooms, and certainly our students are aware of these differences. Even a kindergartner can tell you who's good at math, or who can read, or who can throw a ball really well. In a differentiated classroom, teachers look to students' strengths and their weaknesses as they make instructional decisions.
I'm very good at math, and if we're playing like basketball and PE, I'm not really actually good at that. Yeah.
I'm good at reading green eggs and ham. I'm not good at telling time, but I am good at math.
In addition to differences in readiness for learning, or what we often think of as ability, students also bring differences in their learning profiles and in their interests to our classrooms.
I want to learn more about art and about sculptures and some how you draw some stuff like the turtles and that kind of stuff. If I were to learn about stuff in this classroom, I would actually want to learn about French and Chinese and Japanese and stuff.
I want to learn more about A to Z orders, and because I didn't really know how they made these A to Z orders.
Alphabetical order?
Yeah, alphabetical order.
Student differences in ability or readiness, learning profile, and interest exist whether we're talking about a kindergarten classroom or a high school honors math class. I doubt that we'll ever be able to find a truly homogeneous group of students. Typically in a classroom, a teacher responds to these student differences reactively. This means that after she's assigned a task, she may notice that some students are zipping through it with ease while others are struggling a great deal. She may at that point modify what she's asking of some students so that they can be more successful with the task. She may also add some more elements to the task for those students who will finish it early. Differentiated instruction asks us to approach our planning more proactively. This means that before teaching a lesson or assigning a task, a teacher takes into consideration her students' different readiness levels, learning profiles, and interests, and designs her instruction to address them. Differentiation is based on several guiding principles. The first is that all students need to experience a challenge in order to learn. In fact, brain research tells us this. In other words, if it's easy, you're probably not learning much. And the fact is that what is challenging to one student may not be challenging to another. A teacher in a differentiated classroom learns to balance this need for challenge with the fact that students also need to feel successful.
Like when you go to centers, it's good thing where you should choose hard things, not easy things. Because if you choose easy things, then you won't learn anything more. You won't learn more.
You think there might be a center or something that might be a little too hard? It's still okay if you think it might be a little too hard for you. You can go to something else instead of just trying something that you might think would be a little too hard.
Could you try it if it was a little too hard, but maybe not if it was a lot too hard?
You could try it if it was a little bit, but if you think it would be a big thing of it, then you probably wouldn't like doing it.
I think it's important to meet student needs in my classroom because students come in at many different levels, all wanting to learn. And in order for them to feel successful and be able to work on things that are challenging for them, I need to work with them starting where they are and moving forward so that they can show progress and feel successful.
Another guiding principle is the need for flexible grouping. What this means is that groups change often, so that students see themselves working with a variety of different classmates. Often in classrooms, students come to associate themselves with a given set of students, sort of the bluebirds and buzzards approach to learning. In a differentiated classroom, some days students work in pairs, other days they may work in larger groups, or perhaps they're working independently. And certainly whole group instruction plays a role in a differentiated classroom.
Find the volume of this rectangular box, given that the areas of the surfaces are 40, 80, and 50 centimeters squared. Do this problem first. If you finish this problem, here is the next problem you should try.
For small group work, students can be grouped together based on readiness or ability, learning profile, or interest, or even on some combination of these. Readiness is similar to ability, though a student's ability in, say, art seems much more fixed or static than his or her readiness for it on a particular day. Learning profile is the way in which a student learns best. For instance, some students work best in groups, while others prefer to work alone. Interest is what the students would like to study more about, what they're curious about, what really turns them on. The trick in a differentiated classroom is to mix up the use of these three ways of thinking about student differences, thus resulting in a variety of student groupings. So in a science class, one day students might be grouped based on their readiness or their grasp of the material being studied. But the next day, they may find themselves working in mixed readiness groups with classmates who have similar interests, but very different readiness levels. And it's important to note, too, that sometimes students pick their groups and sometimes teachers assign them. But differentiation does not mean that students are always working in groups. Certainly there are days when students work independently on tasks that are differentiated based on different aspects of their learning characteristics. And there are days when all students are asked to do the same task. The idea is to vary the groupings regularly. In a differentiated classroom, the teacher is really a facilitator of student learning. He or she sets the tone for the classroom environment by communicating very clearly the need for differentiation and the classroom routines that make it work. He then designs lessons and activities that meet a range of learning needs, and he makes the necessary time, space, and material, whatever students will need to be successful, available. Teachers in a differentiated classroom find that they spend a lot of time listening to their students and conferencing with them individually or in small groups to assess student learning and to set goals for continued growth. Assessment takes on a very different role in a differentiated classroom. While in many classes assessment is an ending point, telling us what students have gained during a unit of study or over a period of time, in a differentiated classroom, assessment really tells us what we need to do next. Did my students master what I had intended? If not, what do I need to reteach? Also, it's important that we assess more than just readiness or ability. In other words, how can I find out how my students learn best? Or what they want to learn more about in a particular unit? Assessment can and should take place at many points during our instruction. I can pre-assess my students prior to starting a unit to find out what they already know, and thus what I can essentially omit from my instruction for either all or for some of my students. As a unit progresses, I can make adjustments in my lessons and my student groupings based on daily and weekly assessments. And we often think of assessment as a paper and pencil event. However, sometimes we find out the best information about what students know and understand simply by listening to them. This is especially true in primary classrooms, where students often grasp much more than they are able to put into writing. So in a differentiated classroom, assessment is occurring constantly and takes place in both formal and informal ways. Finally, in a differentiated classroom, students do much of the talking as they learn from one another. This facet of a differentiated classroom is a difficult one for many teachers to get used to. Basically, it means that we're giving up some of our control in the classroom as students guide small group discussions themselves, share their thinking, and begin to learn from each other rather than from just the teacher. They are really learning to take greater responsibility for their own learning. The teacher's role then, in addition to setting the stage for learning to take place, becomes focused on guiding student thinking through prompting and questioning and on assessing student learning.
Really good job with this.
Another difference between a more traditional classroom environment and a differentiated one is the amount of student movement that occurs. In a differentiated classroom, students are often up and moving for a variety of purposes: to change groups, to collect materials, to move between tasks, or move to learning centers. It's a good idea for teachers to ask students to practice getting from one place to another in the classroom quickly, and to begin this practice at the very start of the school year. We often think we need to jump directly into instruction on day one, but time spent establishing classroom routines and expectations early in the year really can pay off in the long run. There's a lot to consider in terms of classroom management as we move from a teacher-centered approach to a differentiated one, which is certainly more student-centered. For example, how do we ensure that students or groups stay on task when we're conferencing with other students? Do students know what to do when they get to a stopping point in their work, either because they've finished it or because they need further direction with it? I've heard a differentiated classroom described as organized chaos. It's not possible to differentiate effectively and maintain silence and no student movement. It just doesn't work that way. But if we're doing it correctly, the talking and the movement are focused and meaningful. One of the best ways to ensure focus in a differentiated classroom is to ensure that the objectives for learning match the activities and assessments, and vice versa. Without this alignment, differentiation can look extremely sloppy, with students doing several different activities that have little or no connection to one another. However, in too many classrooms, I think teachers forget to really reflect on what they want students to know, understand, and be able to do as the result of a unit of study or a series of lessons. So often we find great activities that we think our students will enjoy, but ultimately they may not be directly related to our stated objectives. This is an easy mistake to make, whether we're differentiating or not. So the very first step in differentiating instruction is to identify the goals for a particular unit or lesson. Knowledge level, or what I want my students to know, objectives are really focused on facts. Perhaps these facts are vocabulary terms, or dates, or names of people. When I think of this kind of information, I think of what can be assessed in a matching or a fill-in-the-blank kind of format. This is the information you want your students to have at their fingertips. For example, basic math facts would certainly fall into this group, or spelling rules. Understandings, however, are the big ideas I want students to reflect on during the unit. These might best be assessed during discussions or through short answer or essay items on tests. And finally, be able to do objectives highlight the big skills I want students to gain during a unit. I think that often the best way to assess these is through the observation of student work, though some skills can certainly be assessed in more formal ways. Once a teacher has identified the objectives for a particular study, the next step is selecting and creating activities that clearly address those objectives and meet the varied learning needs of her students.
John, oh, look at the sky.
And your sticky note.
We gotta clean up.
One of the great things about differentiating instruction is that there are many, many ways to do it. Because there are so many strategies that support differentiation, teachers have quite a bit of choice in terms of how differentiation will ultimately look in their classrooms. They can choose to differentiate content, process, or product, or some combination of the three. Content is what we want students to learn. It's also the materials that students use during a unit of study. Process is the activities that students will take part in, what they will do to make sense of information and to build skills. Products are what students create to show us what they have come to know, understand, and be able to do during a unit of study. I think the quickest way to demonstrate the differences between the three is through a spelling example. If I choose to differentiate the content of my spelling instruction, then students will work with different lists of words based on their readiness in spelling. If I decide it would be best to differentiate process, then students have the same words but will do different things with them. For instance, some students might create visual pictures of the words, while others might create word families using them. Differentiating product in spelling could mean that students take different types of spelling tests, thus showing their grasp of spelling in different ways. Some students might take a traditional spelling test in which the teacher, or possibly another student, calls out the words to be spelled. Others might take a multiple choice test, giving them some spelling options to choose from. It really does make sense to differentiate products if content and process have been differentiated. It makes little sense to give students a test or project that does not match the instruction they've been receiving. In addition to choosing what they will differentiate, teachers can also choose whether they will differentiate their instruction based on readiness or ability, learning profile, or interest. Some instructional strategies are best suited to addressing only one of these areas of student differences, while others can certainly be adapted to address more than one. For example, tiered assignments, an important strategy in differentiation, focus only on readiness differences, while raft assignments and contracts can be used to address readiness, learning profile, and interest differences. And while some strategies, such as complex instruction and think-tac-toes, can take quite a bit of planning, others are quick and easy to implement, giving students different or tiered journal prompts, for example, or placing students in think-pair-share groups based on readiness or interest. Again, differentiation gives us a great many options in terms of how we use it, and while it does take time to plan and create, the benefits to students and our teaching are certainly significant.
I feel that it's very important to meet the needs of the students in my classroom for two different reasons. One being an academic reason, in that each kid is at such a different level that in order for them to be receiving the information and processing the information, we need to make sure that we're teaching it at a level that they are able to do that. And then also I think it's very important to meet their needs for personal reasons that involve self-esteem and confidence, because we need to make sure that in order for them to be learning, they have to feel good about themselves and good about the classroom so that they do receive this information that we are trying to teach them.
When I differentiate instruction in my classroom, I think it makes my children feel honored as learners and respected as learners, and helps them learn to take ownership of their learning at school.
Teachers find that when they differentiate their instruction, their students are more engaged in learning, and the fact is that increased engagement in the classroom leads to increased learning. Teachers also find that they can sometimes move more quickly through curriculum because ongoing assessment enables them to bypass objectives that their students have already grasped. If we really took the time before each unit to find out what students already know, understand, and can do, I think we'd be surprised. We'd probably also be surprised by the ways in which they learn best and by the things that inspire them. The most effective instruction, whether it's differentiated or not, occurs in classrooms where teachers really take time to get to know their students. Thinking about differentiating instruction can certainly be daunting. Teaching is hard, there's no doubt about that, and differentiation adds more to it. And just as students need to feel successful as they learn new information and skills, teachers also need to feel that differentiation is something not only worthwhile, but also doable. So some advice. Start small. Pick a subject area or a unit of study that you know well and that you've taught before. Also, don't try to differentiate everything. Pick lessons where it's really needed. For instance, I learned early on as a primary teacher that telling time and counting money simply must be differentiated. Also, select one strategy in particular and focus on mastering that one before adding another to your bag of tricks. Maybe you're really interested in using multiple intelligences or tiered assignments. Once you've gotten comfortable using one of those approaches, try another one. If you keep setting goals for yourself, you'll find over time that your bag of tricks has grown substantially. One thing I recommend mastering quickly is the art of managing small group work. This is essential to the success of differentiation. Also, find a colleague who's also differentiating. Share ideas and lessons, what's working, what's not working. And perhaps most important of all, take time to reflect on your teaching and on your students' learning. Are the changes you're making in your teaching having a positive impact? What other changes can you make? What's happening to your students' engagement in the classroom? What do you find yourself basing your instructional decisions on most often? One final element that is critical to the successful implementation of differentiated instruction: communication. This includes communication with both students and with parents. Students must understand the need for differentiation, and they must buy into the idea of it before it'll work. It's a good idea to share the principles behind differentiation with them and to be ready to have many conversations about these principles over the course of the school year.
So you can find something that's a little challenging and still think to yourself, what?
It's not easy.
Right. If it was all easy, you'd just be doing the same things you already know over and over again.
I think when you pay attention to the needs of each student, that it makes them not only feel good about themselves, but it makes them feel confident in their own abilities, because they feel like you recognize their abilities and you are able to see the positives in those abilities and find ways to work on their weaknesses as well. So I feel like they also feel more in touch with you personally and feel a connection there because they recognize that this teacher understands me, not only understands me as a person, but understands me as a student. And I think that just makes them feel more comfortable in your classroom and with the relationship that you have with them.
Parents also must understand the need for differentiation and what it will look like in your classroom. If they don't, problems will probably arise. For instance, parents talk, and when different homework assignments start coming home, yes, homework should be differentiated too, they're likely to wonder what's going on. A parent night or an open house is a great place to talk with parents about the principles behind differentiation. A letter to parents at the start of the year can also be very effective, but it doesn't hurt to revisit the idea over the course of the school year. Administrators, too, need to know what to expect to see in your classroom. If they're unfamiliar with differentiated instruction and the classroom environment that comes with it, they may wonder why your students aren't working more quietly or why they keep getting up out of their seats to move around the room. Remember, differentiation can look more chaotic than a traditional classroom. Clear communication about it will keep people from wondering what's going on in your room. There are certainly many things to consider as you begin to differentiate instruction. It can be difficult at first as you work to prepare your students and your classroom environment for a new approach. And it certainly requires a shift in thinking about how teaching and learning really should work. But over time, the planning and management required become easier, second nature really, and despite the difficulties, the benefits of differentiated instruction far outweigh the costs to students and to teachers.
Meeting the needs of all students is a difficult task for teachers to do. But in the end, it is well worth it for the teacher and for the student. I feel that if you put the time necessary into the planning to differentiate your lessons and make sure that you're meeting the needs, you'll find that you'll spend less time in the process, and in the end of you won't have to reteach students certain things, because when you teach it to them at their level, the odds of them getting it the first or second time is more likely than if you just taught one lesson and didn't meet the needs of everybody. You would find that during the process and after the process, you would have to continue to reteach those students who you weren't meeting their needs.
I think the best place to start as you think about differentiating in your classroom is to reflect on what you're already doing to meet student needs. To prepare for our first discussion, I'd like for you to complete a self-assessment of your teaching. Part of this assessment involves reflection on the following types of questions. How do I currently meet my students' varying learning needs? What types of learners seem to be most successful in my classroom, and why is that? Do my student groupings vary, and if so, how? What else do I need to learn about differentiation? In addition to reflecting on these questions, you'll respond to questions regarding your current use of instructional strategies that support differentiation.